This is TWiT. Apple is telling developers, when I first saw this headline, I thought, oh, good news, that they're going to pull apps that are out of date, that are old from the App Store. But now I'm starting to think maybe this isn't such a good plan. There are certainly a lot of apps in the Apple Store that haven't been updated in years. Some of them don't work properly, but they're not all abandonware, and developers are starting to say, wait a minute, you mean I have to update my app even though it doesn't need it just to keep it on the App Store? This is especially true of games. Here's a Protopop Games tweet. I feel sick. Apple just sent me an email saying they're removing my free game, Motovoto, because it's more than 2 years old. That's not fair. It doesn't need to be updated, and people still download it.
I think this should be a simple solution to this, which is it's a check-in. Like, hey, your app's still live, right? You still happy with it? Any changes to make? You want, maybe force just to check that it still works, like an approval process, but on a diluted level, and that's it. Yeah. It doesn't need to be updated. It's kind of like a news story. You have published on, updated on, and that's quite helpful. Do that with apps. Published on most recent date, validated, checked for compatibility on such and such a date. Why shouldn't that be a problem? I 100% agree with it. It's ridiculous. Should not be pulled. I'm 100% with this developer on this one.
I also feel like it's not like a one-size-fits-all kind of an issue. And I think that's part of it, too, is like if there's a game that people love and it's still working properly and it's still functioning and people are still playing it, that's very different than, I don't know, maybe an email app or something that isn't being maintained and isn't working or might have like a bug in it or something like that. So I do think that one-size-fits-all approach is going to be difficult to apply here.
This is part of Apple's problem, is that the success of the App Store has been so huge, and there are so many apps in there. I can understand the desire to clean up the App Store, to prune out the weeds, but you just can't at scale. You have to make arbitrary rules like, well, if it hasn't been updated in 2 years, it must be out of date. Costa Eleftheriou, who's been very critical of the App Store, he wrote a program called Flick Type Keyboard, which was a keyboard for the watch designed for visually impaired users. He says Apple removed it because it hadn't been updated in 2 years. Meanwhile, games like Pocket God have not been updated by the developers for 7 years, but they're still on the App Store. But I think those are the kinds of things that are going to happen at this scale. It's very difficult.
But there are much bigger problems, aren't there?
Go ahead, Nate, then Lisa.
There are much bigger problems on the App Store than an app that works fine that you can still download and use, not having been updated for 2 years. Copycat apps or apps that are just garbage. Like, there is so much bad app content on the App Store and on the Google Play Store as well, that they do far better to just do a purge of apps that have not been downloaded and are just clogging up search results.
Go. Maybe use that. Maybe use that as the criterion. Nobody's downloaded this in 3 years. Maybe it's time to remove it. Yeah,
that would be, for me at least, that would make more sense. Get rid of that. Get rid of the clones that you can really, really game.
Oh, man, there's so many Wordle clones. I thought they got rid of them, and then more sprang up, and they're not free.
They're not. And look at the titles and the names. Like, you can game this like 90s SEO, putting different words in the meta tags. Like, it's really, really bad. It's really bad.
There's also the larger question of some games are art, even if they haven't been updated in years. If they're still playable, it's a work of art. It's you don't ask Picasso to update. Well, you couldn't, but you wouldn't ask Picasso to update a painting just because he finished it. Lisa, we interrupted you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say, it's one thing if an app is in danger of possibly not working anymore because it hasn't been updated in 7 years. Maybe, if it hasn't been updated that long, there's a chance it won't. This is just a hypothetical scenario, but I could see Apple doing that if there's a chance it wouldn't be supported by the next version of iOS or something like that. I think Apple has part of why it's so strict in its policies is because it doesn't want you to have to sift through all of these apps that don't work or don't function properly. Like when you go to the App Store, there's a certain level of trust and whatever you download is going to run smoothly, and it's designed and optimized for these devices. So I get that Apple really wants to crack down on making sure developers keep up and keep their apps updated. But going back to what Nate was saying, there's bigger problems. Obviously, copycat apps and clone apps are a much bigger issue, but I think it all falls under that same umbrella of, there is a certain level of trust, but at what cost does that come to the developer community too? I mean, developers have not been that happy with Apple over the past couple of years. And I think, that's also part of, this is just kind of adding fuel to the fire in that regard. But yeah, that's all I was going to add.
It's taken me.
Leo, I want to go the other way.
Okay. Go ahead, Robert.
I want both Apple and Android, not just to remove apps that are not updated on their stores. I want them to remove them from my phone. So, because I've got apps on my phone that have been transferred from phone to phone.
Oh, you want us to do your job. I'm not.
Exactly.
Yes.
Spring clean the whole dang, nuke it from orbit is what I'm saying, Leo.
But I just downloaded Slay the Spire. All right.
I wouldn't want any company to go that far, but I do agree that it would be nice if there were more tools built into these operating systems that helped you realize like what's on your phone and how old some of those apps might be. Because even as a tech journalist, I have so many apps on my phone that I don't use, or maybe I downloaded them once for a specific story that I was working on and then I forgot about them. So it's a lot. It's a burden on people to do that themselves. So I would love to see more of that in iOS and Android updates.
I also have turned on the thing that says if anybody in my family downloads an app, which means there's an interesting, surprising number. Well, let's put it this way. Lisa, a couple of days ago said, I didn't just buy Tinder. I said, why? I said, I didn't think you just bought Tinder. She said, well, it says I just bought Tinder. I said, I hope you didn't buy Tinder. It turns out our 19-year-old son bought Tinder, and it showed up on all our phones, though. So it just, that got turned.
Wait, do you have to buy Tinder? I thought Tinder was a free app.
Well, for some reason, he's paying $10 a month. Maybe it's Super Tinder. Tinder Pro.
Tinder Plus?
Tinder Plus. I don't know. I wouldn't know either. You and I, neither of us know. We're going to talk about... Lisa, do you have anything to say about Tinder Plus?
I was going to say, I'm with Robert on this one. I thought it was free, so hopefully it's not a scam app or something like that.
Oh, God, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I have found 3 of Apple's own apps that it would have to remove under its own policy just in the time we've been talking
Apple's
about
apps, that's right.
Wow.
Remember the remote? Apple Remote wasn't updated for 5 years because the guy was busy.
There's one here called Indoor Survey, published by Apple. That's marked as 2 years old, so that would have to go. There's a Texas Hold'em game Apple released, apparently to great fanfare, according to some of the reviews.
I don't remember that. Wow.
Yeah, well, apparently
Hold'em?
neither does anyone else because it hasn't been updated for 2 years. So
there you go.
There you go.
Oh, the chat room saying, "Oh, he bought Tinder Silver."
Okay. Is that like a cougar finder?
Yeah, cougar finder. Exactly.